and return a ROI. And return an ROI to the investment pool on the activities that we do. So it's sort of a hybrid, but it qualifies as a not-for-profit. So we created that entity 18 months ago, built our first project, built our second. We've just signed the paperwork for the third project, and we seem to have unlimited opportunity in front of us. So we're trying to figure out how to match incoming investment with projects. And so what Randolph offered to help do was a bunch of introductions to see if his cohort of friends and contacts might be interested in participating in this. It is uncertain at this stage exactly what the ROI is going to be. We can't promise you 4, 12, 20% yet because we're still so new. So the first project we did was just to get in the door and to learn a bunch. And so relatively inexpensive, and 3 of us on the board dug in our jeans and threw the 25K on the table to sort of prove to other people we have skin in the game and to make it happen. The next projects required larger chunks, but we learned quite a bit in terms of how to structure a power purchase agreement. And there were a number of toggles in those things. There's the base energy costs. There's tracking the costs of energy in Alberta as it changes and goes more often up than anywhere. Another toggle relates to the carbon tax piece of it and the revenue associated. So right now at $50 a ton, federal carbon tax amount, that works out to 2.65 cents per kilowatt hour. So Baymag's paying us an additional amount on top of the energy costs that we're charging them for the carbon tax because they, quote, need the carbon offsets. So we've built and learned as we go along. iPlace, as an example, is a unique beast in that we're going to be pushing the energy, 100% of the energy from our solar array into the grid and using Solar Club, which I can dive into if you guys want to. But Solar Club, it'll end up producing on a $200,000 array, $33,000 worth of revenue on an annual basis. So that's a decent return on investment, considering most projects that are solar take 12, 14 years-ish to completely offset or to pay out. We have an entirely volunteer board. Our board is almost all structured and set up with business people that have functioned at relatively high levels within business. The reason why we did that was we wanted to structure our entity and our economic assumptions on the market and not on government grants. The government grants boost the ROIs, but they're not necessary to produce a positive return on investment. And that was kind of important to us because as governments changed, policies changed, and it's difficult to build an economic model upon a set of assumptions if you think governments might change. Randolph, what else am I missing in terms of my soliloquy here?
Let's see, maybe so yes, the 1 or 2 churches came on, iPlace 1 and 2, now Baymag. So there's this curve, this very steep curve that you guys have initiated in growth. And I think for me, that was part of the reason, I had the idea of saying, hey, I should reach out to my 650 Alberta LinkedIn contacts and just say, are you aware of what the co-op's doing? And might this be of interest? Because you're at such an interesting time in your growth right now. And it could really, it's a great time, I would say, if I was an individual. This is not investment advice, but I think it'd be a great time for me to get in and to become an investor if I lived here.
Okay, so let me talk about the onboarding process. The onboarding process for us as a co-op is, first of all, to express interest in what the heck are you doing? And we have a basket of information that we can do this, that we can share. The next stage beyond simply that is signing on to the newsletter so you understand what we're doing on a regular basis. The next stage beyond that is signing on as a member. So there's a one-time lifetime payment of $100 to become a member. And then the last stage within this process would be to become an investor. And we have sort of 2 categories of investors. One is people that just invest into the investment pool, like myself, and sort of want to track all that's going on and getting an ROI. The other one is that some entities, like we're looking at a temple in Calgary That is our next project after Baymag. And it's a $70,000 install. And the people who belong to that temple are looking at opportunities to invest, but they've said to us, we really like our money to go to this project. And so we have a little bit of segregation of money where their investment pool, we guarantee is part of the capital stack associated with that project. But most of the people who are involved at this point in time have simply gone straight into the investment pool. If I look out into the future, where I'd like to get to with this organization is similar to the Ottawa Co-op, Green Energy Co-op, where they have $60 to $70 million worth of projects, and they have enough cash flow churning out of this that they build up their capital stack, they do a project, they then go to the market with the project being completed and replenish their capital stack. We're looking at some sort of hybrid of a combination of investment money that comes in and potentially utilizing lending authorities to lend us money to backstop projects. So let's say the temple in Calgary. Right now, we've got all but $11,000 of the capital set aside for that project. Well, let's just go to our lending authority, get the 11,000, build the project, and count on our ability to raise the capital to replace the lending piece. So we're talking to various lending authorities to act as backstops, but we're not at where the Ottawa Co-op is yet because we're only 18 months old.
Maybe this is a good time to quickly create an opportunity to open the lines. If anybody has a question for Joey, please feel free.
Do you use one supplier for the solar panels?
Excellent question. We've done an RFQ and we have 5 suppliers, and we go out with every project and say, give us an RFP price. And we do that, and that gives us the certainty of knowing exactly what the capital cost is. So when we then negotiate the associated power purchase agreement, we know exactly what the input costs are going to be, making the math very easy for us to do.
What's the lifespan of the solar panels?
Solar panels are guaranteed to have less than 4% production degradation over 25 years. And so we factor actually a more aggressive plan into that than 4%. We're about 6 to 7% that we plan on. I've had solar for 10 years here in the Bow Valley, and my variability actually relates to the clean air, which is interesting. So when the 2020 pandemic and the associated shutdown of industry occurred, I started producing my highest volume amount with 6-year-old panels because the air was clearer, which is really interesting. But there's a set of assumptions that you can make generally. And because I've had solar long enough here in the Bow Valley, we use my array as proxy, as well as what comes from the various RFP winners. If I look forward, currently panels that have, so today's panels have about a 17% success rate, which means that of all the energy that comes from the sun, they see 17% of it and are able to convert that to energy. There are panels right now that are designed and actually in production that are 26, but they're not economically worth swapping out yet. But we fully anticipate within the time of the power purchase agreement that we will be replacing 17% panels with more efficient panels because of the economics make sense. We believe that'll happen in that window of time, given the rate of development that happens.
To sustain the investor or the customers, is there a clause within any agreement that you use to hold the customer and replace the panels in a certain time period, just to retain them for a second go around?
We have a 25-year power purchase agreement with each of the hosts that gives us the ability to come in and swap out if we deem it's economically viable, but they are beholden to us to accept the energy for the 25 years.
Question from me, Joey, is that a non-negotiable, or are you open to other term lengths depending on the size of the client or the client's needs?
at this stage, as we're still sort of finding our way, we're open to anything that makes sense.
You have an end of life strategy?
Yes, at the end of life, they accept the panels. Because the cost of reclamation at that point in time won't match the economics.
So
I got a
what I'm
question.
understanding is it kind of grandfathers them back into the host site at that point?
That's correct. Yes.
Hey, I have a question about this church one. What's the maximum output of the panels for the system?
Generally, there's a 1 to 10 ratio. So if you have a 10 kilowatt system, you can count on producing about 10 megawatts over a year.
Yep.
However, if you've got a perfect orientation or you're in a cleaner environment. So I now live in Dead Man's Flats, where I lived in Canmore for 18 years, and the difference is 20%. I was quite shocked. Now I have a perfect roof, a south facing roof, 812 pitch. And the result is that I'm getting on a 7.2 kilowatt system, 9,000 kilowatt hours over the course of a year. So instead of getting 7,200 kilowatt hours, I'm getting 9,000. So a little bit it is orientation and where you are. I think the more you come into the mountains, the more clouds they're going to be, the more that you're going to see less production. And that's why I think so many industrial productions are built in the southern part of the province where they have the least amount of weather and clouds. So we use a 1-to-1 ratio in our assumptions, but that has also been variable based upon the pitch of the roof and the orientation and other variables. But that is part of the RFP process and the associated expected production values that come from these the bidders.
So what drives a host to do this versus in a microgeneration system space versus doing their own system and purchasing that power directly from you?
Excellent question. So the categories are enterprises that don't have the capital, so think churches, or industrial buildings that are going to condominiumize the building, but want to have solar on before they get to that point to deal with all the energy. Or number 3, enterprises that, like Baymag. Baymag's got 24 plants worldwide. They're a German-based organization, and they made it pretty clear to the local guys, no money available for green energy generation is going to go to other places where the costs of energy are higher, and therefore the ROI is quicker relative to the cost of energy. And so they're investing in green energy in other locations. So locally, the plant really wanted it, so they approached an entity like ours, so they don't have to have the capital associated with building it.
Can they get a structured PPA for an off-site or an off-take off-site versus doing it on-site for a better value proposition there?
Everything that we're doing with them is behind the meter, it's on site.
Which affects the PPA rate.
Exactly, to the positive, to be honest. What they have is their grid tied, so it's not regional distribution, it's grid tied with AltaLink straight into their system. And so we're going to be in the beginning 1.5% of their total energy needs. So everything will be consumed internally, not exported to the grid. Now, if I could just segue on Baymag, in that location, there is 4% of the time that there's no wind. They're in that little tight spot as you leave the mountains. So one of the things that they're interested, as we are as well, is exploring whether vertical wind turbines would make sense there. So one of the things we're discussing once we finish this first phase is whether we could build up a test tower to do a test for 15 months to know exactly what the wind profile is right there. And that will help us determine the economic viability. But if you've got a wind array that has a 90% uptime, the economics are strong. But given the shiftiness of the wind, the standard wind turbines you see in the southern part of the province may not be the choice that we use. We may need either a more robust conventional design or the vertical axis units that are agnostic as to where the wind's coming from or how shifty it is. But that's down the road. But they want us, they quote, "We like the green energy, we need the carbon credits."
Can you maybe speak just quickly to the carbon credit piece, like where you see that going and how it's playing out in Alberta? And then also segue to so the actual how to be an investor piece and that sort of accredited investor versus members, et cetera, that process.
Sure. Carbon market. So the carbon market in Alberta, and worldwide, there's either regulatory or voluntary. And regulatory in this province right now under the current regulations is if you emit more than 100,000 tons per year, you automatically fall under the regulatory side of it, and you must either have offsets or pay $50 a ton for your carbon footprint. And so economically, it's worth their while to try to figure out how to develop offsets. It's interesting to notice that several large oil sands companies have pivoted away from wind turbines to carbon sequestration in terms of their economics and where they're going to be funding their money or funneling their efforts. Under the voluntary market, it's a little bit more of a Wild West, but there is the quality of the offsets. And so if you use enterprises that are recognized by the Canadian Standards Association or other ISO-based organizations, the process is that you create the carbon offset and it gets developed by a regulated, recognized authority. And then there's a second verification. So we use VERRS, as the secondary authentication, I can't even speak, authentication of the process. Now we have something that is independently verified and it is easily retailable. And in Alberta, there's an additional piece, which is that the enterprises that produce the carbon must purchase their offsets within the geographic footprint of the province. And so there is a higher value associated with those simply because of demand.
But if I'm understanding the PPA for most situations, they'll be retiring in-house instead of going to market.
For the large ones, for the small ones, we're owning the carbon credits. So for iPlace, they didn't need them, didn't want them. And so when we develop a big enough pool, we'll actually be able to retail those as well.
Okay, perfect. Are you planning to retail in-house?
Would probably use a partner like Radical or some enterprise like that to retail it.
Thank you.
It's not our core expertise. And again, remember, we're all volunteers on this board. We're trying to get to the point where we have staff. We have been big brothered by the biosphere since the beginning, where they've given us some of their staff's time to just manage administration and other pieces and marketing. But at some point in time, we need to grow up and have our own staff. And so we're trying to get to that point.
Do you want to speak briefly on that point on the Rocky Mountain Community Power tie-in?
Excellent. So we decided to take advantage of something that's available that's unique in the Alberta market. So under the Ralph Klein government, he broke apart the monopolies, and you could be a energy company, an energy generation company, a line company, or a retailer. And some companies, Enmax, Epcor, et cetera, they're all three. But there's Altalink, which is a lines company, as an example. Within this market, some enterprises created retail arms. UtilityNet was one of them. And UtilityNet figured out a model where they became the white branded back of house for what is now 24 different retailers in Alberta. Bow Valley Power being one, et cetera. There's quite a few. And these retail to the market. People sign on. They think they're signing on to the energy company, but all of the back of house stuff is managed by UtilityNet. So the product offering that we offer with a company we created called Rocky Mountain Community Energy, which is a sub of Bow Valley Green Energy Power, is brown through green energy, natural gas, internet, carbon credits, and Solar Club. And I just want to sort of walk through a couple of those things that might not be familiar with people. It is passive income for us. Once we bring in a client, it's basically managed on a regular basis by UtilityNet. Bills get issued, energy gets created, etc. Solar Club in Alberta is a creation of UtilityNet. I belong to it with my arrays as an example, and it supplies a much higher energy value than others. So one of the things it does is last year was 25.85 cents per kilowatt hour exported to the grid. The result of that as an individual homeowner was my December energy bill was minus $90. That's after the energy costs and the T&D charges and the franchise fees, et cetera, all of those costs, it was still minus 90. And that's a residual because I'm energy positive in my little solar array from mid-March to mid-October. And that unique product allows us to do interesting things. And so the first church project is pivoting this winter over to Solar Club so that they can increase the ROI, but we get to keep the ROI increase. So we've got a fixed price that we agree to with them, and any extra on top goes into our investment pool to increase the return on investment available for the investors. We're going to do that with iPlace and the 128 kilowatt system. And the difference in that system, as an example, is if we just went straight grid for grid, we'd make $17,000. But instead, we're going to make $33,000 because we use Solar Club.
Briefly,
So
sorry, Joey. When someone becomes a member as a first step to becoming an investor, what's the process after that? And I actually wanted to clarify on this 12-month window, or are you looking at exceptions to that?
So the 12-month window was something that exists in the regulations within newly created co-ops, where a newly created co-op had to only use friend, family, or accredited investors for the first 12 months. And then after that, they could go to subscription agreements and other things like that. We're beyond that 12-month window. You identified that it's still on the website. That's because we're a volunteer-driven organization, and I'm overtaxing our volunteers.
You keep saying this, eh? Uh-oh, growth.
And we haven't completely cleaned up everything behind because we don't have staff yet.
Okay, I will break to say there's about 7 minutes left on my limited Zoom account here. I guess if this is a good time either for more questions or to just consider how you would invite individuals if who wanted to take another step into this process, what to do.
So what we will offer is we'll build a downloadable link that you can send out to everybody who's responded positively, and they can then download it to look at all the baskets of information to decide if they simply want to sign on and get the newsletter, or whether they wish to become a member or do the full deal and consider being an investor.
Okay, great. Thank you. So almost like a mini data room.
Right.
Okay.
But we won't get that done today because I'm not even getting the answers I want to get out of the vault. So
out of your mouth.
The chair, for instance, he's retired Shell executive who, when he retired, the president of Shell International asked him to get the LNG pipeline back on schedule and back on budget, which he did as a retired person in 18 months. And now he's the senior advisor to the Fort McKay Indian band that's building a oil sands plant. And he's doing these are things that he does retired. And so I'm always challenged with pulling some of the
look out, folks. If you become a member, you might quickly be volunteered for something.
Yeah. Well, only if you want, but it is really a lot of fun to be
Speaking
changing
of members, what's the distribution right now? What percentage of the members are firmly in the Bow Valley versus starting to
good
migrate?
question. About 50% of our members are Bow Valley, and then probably 25, 30 are Calgary based, and then there's a smattering from Edmonton to a bit further south.
Well, I would say
Questions?
with the last 4 or 5 minutes, yeah, but just open it up for questions on any subject, the portfolio, the organization, or the investment strategy, or solar or renewable energy in general in the province of Alberta. Fire away.
I just have a quick question about how you go about negotiating PPAs with your potential clients. I know you mentioned that I guess you got those kind of two-tiered strategies where if they're specifically requesting keep their carbon offset, that's something you kind of bake into the
Mhm.
way that PPA rate is kind of established. Like how flexible is that process, I guess, from as this point of view?
Well, between the host and our organization, it's entirely flexible in terms of negotiation. But we need to be able to structure it in such a way so that we produce a decent ROI for our investment pool. So there has to be. So we started off as being, frankly, the low-cost provider, and we realized, yeah, producing a 2.5% ROI for our investment pool is a rapid route to nothing. And so we needed to create a more advantageous PPA. And so we've done that with the subsequent projects. What we provide for them, most importantly, is price certainty. For the energy that we generate, they know exactly what that's going to cost over a very long period of time. You just look at the RRO within the Alberta non-regulated market. 40% of Albertans are on the RRO, and they have no idea that this month, the various energy companies are between 22 and 26 cents per kilowatt hour. Whereas our energy that we sell with Rocky Mountain Community Energy is at 9 cents. And it's just that people don't know. They don't pay attention. They're going to suddenly look at $1,000 energy bill and go, holy mackerel, what happened? Back to what we offer any host is 25 years of knowledge. And our capital cost is just at the front, boom. And then it just sits there as in purrs for 25 years.
For your PPA agreements with the microgenerators, are you having to worry about time of use at all, or with the cumulative metering, your energy rates blended with their energy use monthly?
So Alberta doesn't have time of use variability yet. It might someday, but it doesn't at this point in time. So it's simply any energy they generate during periods when there's daylight, because electrons hate to flow. It'll first be consumed internally, and anything excess gets exported through a bidirectional meter into the grid, and that gets recorded as export energy.
I'll follow up with that one later. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, speaking of follow-ups, so after this call, I'll reach back out to each of you individually and provide a link to the data room, as Joey mentioned. And yeah, just kind of get your thoughts and what your outlook on this might be, and specifically around investing into the co-op and profiting from these long-term power purchase agreements. So that'll happen before the end of the week.
No guarantees. I can't make that promise.
Oh, just my follow-up.
I promise to try to build this data room, but it requires some of the other volunteers to contribute, and I've got 90% of it done, but not 100%.
Okay, no worries. I mean, the holidays are here, so this is kind of, like I said, thanks very much, everyone, for making the time before the holidays hit. And I'm sure we'll be following up. Well, early January would probably be what works best for most people. If anyone has a burning desire to spend $20,000 before then on solar power and microgeneration, let us know, of course. But yeah, this is something that we kind of see going forward into January. So we're about to expire here. We're at less than a minute. So I will say thanks for attending, and we'll follow up soon and have an excellent holiday season.
And I thank all of you.
All right, great. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thanks for the time.
Yep, I'll send the recording link. That's what I'll do right away.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
And have a great Christmas, everybody.
You too.